So thank you very much for joining us everyone this evening. My name is Rosie Cockgreave and I am the project manager of the Saving Devon's Treescapes project. We're here tonight, and hopefully it's why you're here, to talk about plastic-free planting and what more we can be doing and what so far is being done. We have Joe here from the Woodland Trust, who is going to take you through many trials that have happened so far. But just to give you an introduction of why we've set up this talk and why it's of interest. The Saving Devon's Treescape project is led by the Devon Wildlife Trust on behalf of the Devon Ash Dieback Resilience Forum. It is a partnership project, and we're very happy to have Woodland Trust as one of our partners. There are about 17 partners across Devon, so it's really well supported across the whole county. Our aim is to plant and nurture 250,000 trees outside of woodlands across Devon. So we're talking everything from single trees in people's gardens up to around 500 trees, which is about half a hectare. So that's basically lots of trees in lots of different places, which is why we're slightly different to other projects. And we're focusing on trees outside of woodlands because of ash dieback and the devastating impact that is having across our landscape. Around 90% of ash trees are due to die in the coming years, and they're the second most common tree outside woodland in Devon. In Devon alone, there's about 1.9 million mature ash trees outside of Devon. So you can just, well, it's hard to imagine what that impact is going to be like on our landscape. So it's really vital for us to be looking to the future now and trying to secure a healthy, diverse and resilient treescapes moving forward. However, trees need protecting. Whilst we're doing tree planting, a lot of the time for wildlife and the biodiversity benefits, often also needs to be protected from them to get its first start to life. And up until very recently, obviously plastic tree tubes and guards have been the way to go, but we're all very aware of the impacts that plastic can have on our environment, which is why it's vital that we explore other options and try and make sure planting trees doesn't contribute to the plastic problem, but instead can work harmoniously with it. So that is a very brief introduction to our project. I can always say more about it later. I will also send a follow-up email later with a recording of this talk for you and with details about our project and how you can get involved in Devon. But for now, I'll pass you over to Joe.
Thank you, Rosie. Hope you can all hear me all right. I'm going to share my screen and get started on the presentation. Hopefully just over half an hour I'll talk to you and then we've got time for some questions at the end that hopefully I'll be able to answer. Okay. Rosie, I guess you're going to let me know if there's any problems. And
yeah, you're all good.
Fantastic. So and that is first slide, yeah, Rosie? Perfect.
Yeah.
So there's a reason this is called Our Journey to Plastic-Free Woodland Creation at the Woodland Trust, and not the answer to plastic-free woodland creation, because we're still on that journey at the moment. It's a really, really interesting one that I have been part of for about 4 years now. And it all started with a site we took on called Avoncliff Wood, which is actually in the old county of Avon near Bristol and Bath. And Bradford on Avon. It runs alongside the River Avon, and we had about 5,000 trees that were to go and be planted to extend the ancient woodland there. The ancient woodland is a magnificent woodland with very little public access, and we wanted to open up the surrounding land to people to be able to enjoy and create and buffer that woodland by creating woodland by planting trees. But I don't know about you, I try not to use any plastic milk bottle. I tried not to use any plastic if at all I can. So the thought of using 5,000 plastic tree guards wasn't at the top of my agenda. So me and a few colleagues had a little look to see if there were alternatives around. But since the 1970s, the default has been to use these plastic tubes, usually 1.2 meters. And as Rosie said, they protect trees from most herbivores, of which in the UK we do have quite a few. So between usually deer, there are 2 native species of deer, roe and red, in the UK, and we also have about 5 non-native species to add to that now, which includes muntjac, fallow, sitka, Chinese water deer. But in most parts of the UK, we also have rabbits, hares sometimes as well, and even voles. So there are a number of herbivores, and protecting them with plastic tubes, as I said, has been the default for a number of years, and it does sometimes in some conditions actually help improve the growth of the tree. As I said, we planted about 5,000 trees, but I'm going to go back a little step here and explain to you why the Woodland Trust decided to go plastic free a couple of years ago across our estate. As I said, I don't have the answer just yet, but hopefully you'll see some fantastic trials, some case studies that we are working on across the Woodland Trust to try and find an answer to not having to use these tubes. So to go back a little bit, there's 3 reasons why across the Woodland Trust that we decided we needed to make a change. Firstly, plastic pollution. I don't need to go into huge detail about why plastic pollution is a problem. Hopefully this is an audience who knows the details, but I think it is worth mentioning that many of us, myself included, were probably a little unaware of the scale of the problem, and it was in 2018 that Blue Planet 2 produced a terrific program with David Attenborough about the real scale of what happens when it gets into our seas and our rivers. And that 2018, I think, was a wake-up call, not just for the environment sector, but as a UK as a whole, if not globally. We realized that not just plastics, but also microplastics were a huge problem. Tree guards have been planted in their millions across the UK, billions probably across the whole of the world, and tree guards are not going away, and it has been very difficult to recycle them. They generally have gone to landfill, and there isn't a closed loop recycling system. So even with the best intentions, tree guards can get blown off of site, they can get washed away in flooding and end up in rivers, courses, hedgerows, and eventually biodegrading into sea. And I wasn't happy with that, and nor were most people in the Woodland Trust, and we've been looking at how we can do something about that from our little area of influence. Sorry. So plastic pollution is a problem for most people, and we also decided to ask our supporters what their main environmental concerns were, and plastic unsurprisingly came out top 4 years ago when we carried out this study. This was a Green Insight study. So both plastic and ocean pollution, which are pretty much 2 of the relative things, were in that top area for people, and they were really concerned about it. We decided that one thing we could do was actually to try and eliminate it on our sites. But it wasn't just because of pollution. Let's be honest, there is also a cost implication. The cost of planting a tree is only about 20p. By the time you add a little bit of labor on, it's probably a little bit more, but a tree guard and the stake is probably £1.50. So by far and away, the most expensive part of it was collecting up those tree guards and supplying them at the start. So if we can plant without tree guards, it's better for everyone, let's be honest. And at the same time as cost implications, we are looking as an organization at offsetting people's carbon. By planting trees, we do plant trees to be able to soak up and measure carbon on a scale, and the Woodland Carbon Code is now taking off in terms of the whole UK government, and those tree guards have an effect on the carbon that we're supposed to be sequestering. Now, there are studies out there that still are pointing out that trees, by far and away, even with a plastic tree guard, far outweigh the carbon impact of a tree guard. So tree planting in any method is still a good answer. It's not the only answer though. So the third, as well as plastic pollution, are supporters, the agenda and cost. In 2019, you'll remember the UK governments and all the different parties were actually promising huge numbers for trees. So this is just what I managed to collate. This is back in 2019. The Conservatives promised 30 million trees a year, Labour 60, Liberal Democrats 60 million trees, and the Green Party promised 70 million trees to go in. Now, that was after the 10 years previous to that was about 1.7 were going in a year. Average numbers over the last 3 years, just for your interest, seem to be around about 2.3 on a, should we say, a generous estimation of how many are going in. There are now terrific incentives to plant trees that have been released over the last year from the government. So hopefully we will get there to be where we need to increase the 13% woodland cover we have in the UK, hopefully to either 20 or if not even 25%. So there's a bit of background there. But in 2019, at the very end of it, we also had a terrific campaign launched by Extinction Rebellion, do you remember climate emergencies? Every council, every pretty much country declared a climate emergency at the very end of 2019, early 2020. The Woodland Trust launched a big climate fight back. Climate agenda was #1 in the headlines. Whatever you think of Extinction Rebellion's methods, they really did put it into the headlines, and we were in a good place to be able to look at how we could do that using what the Woodland Trust is, which is planting trees, creating woodland, and also managing ancient woodland and campaigning to protect woodland. So this pretty much put trees on the agenda massively. And then, of course, COVID hit in 2020, and we all took a slight step back in terms of what we were doing. But the Woodland Trust decided to move forward in 2021 with this pledge. So this pledge came out, you may have seen it in the news. Essentially, no new single-use plastic tree guards on our estate anymore from the end of 2021. Now we kept that, so we still had the option of using recycled plastic, because we think that's still a good part of the system, but it's obviously somewhere else on the waste hierarchy. If we can avoid using tree guards, that's even better. The reception from this pledge was really good. Across the UK, different news articles actually carried forward that. They put my lovely face all over it without asking me, our Woodland Trust. So on Twitter, on Facebook, The Guardian, on our website, we went full on this, and we decided to make a big thing without having any answers into what is the answer to not using plastic. We decided to lead by trying to create a stir within the sector to look at finding an answer when there wasn't one quite there. Now, you could argue that going back before 1970, we managed to plant vast numbers of trees without plastic tree guards, but we also didn't quite have as many grazing herbivores as we probably do now. So was this ambitious enough just on our estate? Probably not. And our trustees didn't think so either. So the next steps have been looking at where we work off of our estate and how we can influence that. So the subsidized tree packs that we sell, there's been you have to opt in to get any form of protection since October last year. Free community tree packs. As of this point forward, if you order any of our free community tree packs, which we give free trees to schools and community groups, you won't get any protection at all, in favour of guidance. Outreach, so a lot of the work we do with landowners in terms of subsidising tree planting and woodland creation for charities, for NGOs, for farmers, for landowners, we don't always have a say in that. It's not our land, but we can influence, and we are advising and offering incentives to other people to try and plant plastic free. And hopefully with a full transition that we will not offer any protection in the trees we provide in the future. And then our campaign later on this year and early next will be to influence the existing tree guards that are already in place in the countryside to make sure that for the millions and millions that already exist, they are reused, if not recycled. So we decided across the Woodland Trust we should probably also get our house in order, find out where our existing shelters are. So we did a huge amount of research to find out, plot and count every single tree guard we had in existence on our estate, when they would no longer be used, when we could put them out and recycle them or put them onto other sites. Now, tree guards aren't always useful after the end of their life, after 5, 7, 10 years of when that tree's grown to a height that it's no longer needed to be protected. So we have found that reusing them is doable. You can wrap an elastic, you can slip down a plastic tree guard and use an elastic band to reuse them as much as you can, but recycling them is now possible, and there is some good recycling schemes available that several of the companies themselves are now running to be able to collect up and remake them into to tree guards again in a closed loop recycling system. So one of the other things the Woodland Trust did, as well as our trials of finding an alternative to plastic, which I'll come on to in a minute, which is what I've been project managing for the last 3 years, we also teamed up with some universities to look at the research side of it. So any of the products that we are trialing as alternatives to question their sustainability credentials and make sure we don't use something that's even worse than plastic. So we're working with UCL, University College London, and they have a brilliant plastic team, plastic waste innovation hub. So UCL in London have worked with us to do some analysis of life cycles of no plastic, overplanting, and some different alternative methods. And there are some papers available on the UCL Plastic Waste Innovation Hub and some terrific talks that they've actually got in plastic as a whole across the UK. The terminology of biodegradable, compostable, it's all a little bit murky at the moment. There is no absolute UK definition in terms of biodegradability and compostability to anything that is claiming to have some sort of green credential. And we're also working with the University of Plymouth, and we've teamed up with those guys and Forest Research to carry out some studies on alternatives to plastic. And also both organizations are working with us to look at the full life cycle analysis of any product we believe is worthy of investing in. So one other thing we're doing is working in partnership with a few organizations. So I sit on a panel of about 20 other organizations where an individual from each of those charities, governmental organizations, industries, nurseries, all try and are reducing plastic from across the whole of the sector. So it's called the Forest Plastics Working Group, and that's made up of Forestry Commission, DEFRA National Trust, Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust, DERA in Northern Ireland, Woodland Trust, obviously, National Parks, and COMFOR and Till Hill, and that's chaired by the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust themselves. We have put on 2 conferences, one back in 2019 in November when the movement was just starting to take off, and also there was one in Leeds only 3 months ago, back in November 2022. And they were basically collating partners who've been working at reducing plastics, not just tree guards, plastics across the whole sector, from planting bags to signage, to try and reduce plastic from across the whole woodland and forestry sector. And many of those organizations, including ourselves, have helped fund a forest research governmental trial, which is probably going to be one of the leading scientific experiments at looking at alternatives to plastic. And that's not just tree guards, that's looking at companion planting, that's looking at spraying with trichode deer repellent, which is made of sheep fat. Apparently sheep and deer don't mix. If anyone can give me an answer to that evolutionary question, I'd be very interested. But you can spray saplings apparently with sheep fat, lanolin, and that can keep deer away. And they are also Forest Research. It's led here, and the link to the bottom, Forest Research Alternatives to Conventional Plastic Tree Shelters. That piece of research is being led by a guy called Ian Willoughby, and hopefully it's just been planted last winter, 2021-22 and 22-23 is the second lot that have just gone into the ground. So hopefully in a couple of years they'll have some really good results into what is working and what isn't working with all the different methods that are currently available. Now, the one thing the Woodland Trust is trying to champion, and in everyone I speak to, is that the most sustainable protection is no tree shelter at all. So there are a million different ways that can be done. And I'll go through a few of those now, some case studies that we have and some experiments we're working on. But one thing we are trying to do above all else is go back pre-1970 when using a tree shelter wasn't an option. And that is now to make that using a tree shelter should be a conscious decision and not the default, because for the last 40 years it has been the default option. If you put a tree in the ground, generally you put a plastic tree shelter around it. We want just like a conscious decision of buying plastic in your household items. We want to make that a conscious decision in terms of the sector. So wildlife management, herbivore impact assessments, and then some case studies. Now, wildlife management, control of any animal is an emotive subject. I don't want to go into huge details about it now, but if anyone is thinking straight away we just need to shoot all the deer, it's not that easy. And also it should only ever be carried out once it's evidence led. So any kind of control of herbivores needs to be done via evidence, And the best way to look at that evidence is a herbivore impact assessments. So when anyone is planting trees, it could be as simple as, if you're planting a couple of trees in an allotment, what species of animal or what strimmer is likely to curtail this tree from growing any further. If you're planting fields, then it's looking at neighboring land or surveying, or if you're looking within a woodland setting, it's looking at the impact of herbivores on that environment too. There are parts of the UK where deer are hugely impacting on other native species and their ability to regenerate plants. Some very rare species, lichens, mosses, are suffering hugely from overgrazing. Now, there are parts of the UK also where there are no deer. So before anyone defaults to a plastic tree guard, we're just trying to get people to remind themselves just to check first. Carry out a herbivore impact assessment and just look at what is there. Talk to other landowners, because deer control needs to be done on a landscape scale to get any kind of success, and it's not simple and it's not always the answer. And what we'd like to see is research and evidence before anyone does anything, and that is where our herbivore impact assessments come in. So it sounds complex, but essentially it's looking for signs of deer. And we don't need to be an expert tracker to do this. You just need to look for signs of browsing on saplings, coppice growth, bramble, ivy from the bottom of trees, and look for deer. Simple as walking around and seeing what species of deer, whether you have muntjac in the wood, like the small one you can see in the bottom left corner, which are an invasive species, not native to the UK and introduced. And you can look for signs of droppings. You can look for signs of tracks. I've been to parts of Devon where red deer are in such high numbers that they actually poach the ground just like cattle do, and you can see giant areas where they've been trampling. But assessing the herbivore impact is the most important thing you can do, and getting a little bit of evidence so you have a report down. Now, the other thing you can do is use a drone. So over the last few years, technology has massively changed how you can look for a deer and the impact it's having. So we are carrying out thermal drone imaging deer surveys. It sounds hugely technologically crazy, but you can employ someone for several £100s to do this for you. If you're planting 50,000 trees, you know what, you might save yourself an absolute fortune by carrying out a drone survey first. If you're planting a few trees, just ask some questions and check. You obviously don't need to go to these methods, but it's very interesting. I've found it fascinating when I've carried out deer surveys, because a drone can essentially go up into the sky, stick on a thermal deer imaging camera, and find large numbers of deer from within the vegetation that you can't see with your naked eye. It can zoom in from hundreds of meters away and identify the species of deer, the sex of the deer, and then you can plot where they are in the landscape and how many you've got. And we've been doing that from across the UK at the Woodland Trust on many of our sites, not just sites we're planting, also sites where we're restoring. So the Woodland Trust restores large areas of ancient woodland too back to native broadleaf. And we have plotted in the early stages several areas of the UK, and this is probably about 18 months old, this picture now, actually, sorry. So there's even more sites where we have looked at what species are there and in what numbers. And that gives you a really good idea for what protection you need if you're going to create woodland and plant trees. So different methods of protecting those trees. So plastic tree guards are one method. Now, many of them are made from crude oil, and plastic was initially biodegrading into small particles because people thought that was great to try and get rid of the plastic at the end of its life. You can alter the chemistry within a tree guard for it to biodegrade quickly or slowly. But very quickly people realized about 4 or 5 years ago, many of us, that we didn't want things to biodegrade into small particles anymore. And what we wanted was to find some alternatives. Here's some examples. So Avoncliff Wood is the site I've been project managing, and I've just been carrying out study and research into all these others at the same time for the Woodland Trust. through our sustainability arm of what we do, with a colleague of mine who's our head of sustainability. So back in 2019, we'd bought this site, and I had to plant 5,000 trees, as I mentioned earlier on, and I didn't want to use the plastic. So in 2019, we initially found about 4 guards. By 2020, in the top corner, you can see there's 7 different alternatives to plastic. And by May 2021, we'd found 14 alternative tree guards. That's now up to 16 on site. So I have 16 different types of tree guard, and they range from cashew nut resin with sheep's wool to pine resin and cotton to cardboard to paper to bioplastics made from maize, potato, sugar. All these are trying to find different methods than essentially crude oil plastic. But some of the bioplastics behave similarly to plastic, whether they're made from maize or potato or sugar sometimes, and other ones can biodegrade and have proven biodegradability credentials. And as I've discovered over the last few years, finding out the full sustainability credentials of each of these products isn't as easy as you would think. So just on the one left, hopefully this is your left hand side where it says bioplastic, there are a few alternatives there which look and feel remarkably like plastic, but they're essentially made from plant starch and lactic acid. So that plant starch is usually maize grown en masse. Sometimes that uses a large amount of water or chemicals, but then so does cotton. Now, there are many different ways that bioplastic can be created. Plastic is a generic term for any kind of something that's malleable under heat. So bioplastic is a generic term, and actually of these 16 alternatives I've been working on, there's probably about 6 or 7 bioplastic alternatives out there, and then cardboard makes up a good 8 products. Unfortunately, we haven't managed to get cardboard to last more than 2 years at the moment. So there are some possibilities, but at the moment, cardboard would be great. It's you know, it's made from trees. It's a paper resin. Sorry, it's a paper product that has its own life cycle in terms of trees soaking up carbon, and it biodegrades into the soil. Bioplastic depends on the product and what it's made from, and the biodegradability credentials need to be checked because there isn't a biodegradability standard for tree guards in the UK yet. And then natural resins and fibers. So these are the weird and wonderfuls. Some of these guards are made from cashew nut shell resin and sheep's wool and castor oil. Some guards are made from pine resin and cotton, and some coming to the market soon are made from plant resins and wood chip. So there are the main 3 particular, I'd say, the main 3 types that you can find alternative shelters at. Now, this site, Avoncliff Wood, is open to the public 365 days a year. You are welcome to visit there anytime, have a look. And within reason, any organizations are very welcome to come and visit, because a picture tells 1,000 stories, but unfortunately visiting is probably the best way, because not all trees are necessarily planted inside some of these guards. This isn't a scientific study, it's more of a field study to look at whether or not the shelters survive for 3, 5, 7 years, not whether the tree's surviving within them, because there's too many variables about the season you plant in, how it's planted, and who it's planted by. So this is just looking at shelters. So that's what they look like in October 22. So if I go back slide, standing in May 2021, to go forward to October 2022, now there's not many left. So pretty much 6 left of the 16, but some of the ones that have collapsed in this picture are still standing. A few of the cardboard are still standing after 2 years, but in some instances we planted 10 of one product, in other instances we planted 1,000. So if you planted 1,000, you're bound to get 50 still standing. But if you planted 10 and all 10 go, then it looks like the entire product's useless. But is not. There is some variables. So I do advise you, if you want to, you can very much contact me through the Woodland Trust. But if you want to go and visit this site and have a look, I must stress there are no answers, because some of these products, although they went in 2019, some only were available in 2020 and 2021, and some only in 2022. So they've only been in the ground for between 1 and 3 years, which isn't long enough to tell you exactly where you should, put all your eggs in which basket. There are no answers yet, but hopefully plenty of questions, and hopefully I can answer some of your questions later on in a minute. One thing we are using at Avoncliff, though, is using this site as a demonstration to be able to share everything we are learning. So all these different organizations have either asked me, contacted me, or been out to site in various groups to have a look at what we're doing and what's working and what's not before they go forward and make their decisions. And something that many of you might be interested in is a list of alternative shelters. This is available to download. I will give you the email address at the end, but essentially the Forest Plastic Working Group that I sit on, we've made a 2-page PDF which we can send around to anyone who wants to find these products. You don't have to do the research yourself. I spent a lot of time trying to find these alternatives. I even managed to get a couple from Austria back in 2019 when there was only 4 products available. But these are the contact addresses and how to find them. But to go back a step, the most sustainable protection is obviously not using a tree shelter at all. How do you do that? Now, silvicultural methods, basically. You go back to what we did before tree guards existed, except we didn't have such large herbivore pressure, and we didn't have 7 different species of deer roaming the countryside, hares, rabbits, voles in large numbers. So here's a few examples of things we are trialing from across our estate. Now, there's also a lot going on off of our estate, plenty of people doing some fantastic things, and also plenty of ways of planting trees without any of these methods, but they don't always make good photographs. If you just put a load of saplings in the ground, they don't make good photographs, and collating them has been quite difficult. So I've just shown you what I've managed to find, and hopefully some things that we're doing across the Woodland Trust here. So this is using deer fences and bioplastic vole guards. Now, there are now alternatives to bioplastic vole guards. You can get some of the natural resins or cardboard vole guards as well. But essentially putting up a 6-foot-high deer fence with rabbit netting will keep out most of your big herbivores. But you do need to protect them from voles. Now, we planted in Brunei in Wales 2,500 trees with recycled guards and some of these bioplastic vole guards. At Mead in north, well, just north of our head office, actually, in the north of England, Mead had put 10,000 bioplastic vole guards in the deer fence, and in West Cornthorpe in Durham, we also planted 22,000 trees in vole guards made from bioplastic. Now, bioplastic vole guards generally need to be industrially composted at the end of their life, so you are still having to come out with a cost to collect up. Now, if you're doing that with 1,000 trees, that's doable. If you're doing that with 100,000 trees, that's going to cost quite a lot of money. So finding biodegradable bioplastics, they are now claiming, several suppliers, that their biodegradable bioplastic tree guards will biodegrade in situ in the soil, if not chipped or mulched into the ground. Here's some other examples of literally putting a deer fence and no shelter whatsoever, and you might get a few losses, but it's very easy to replace a 20p tree with inside a deer fence. If you've carried out a herbivore impact assessment, you don't have rabbits or hares, you don't need to worry about them. I'll go back to that one, actually, and that's in North Yorkshire, sorry. So we've got 50 different compartments here, or with 50 trees in each. So this is an experiment on a smaller scale. So I'd say they're probably 20 by 20 meter deer exclosures here, with trees planted in them with no guard whatsoever. So no shelter. So Heartwood Forest is a really good example, just near Luton, north of London, where we planted 600,000 trees. I'm going to say that again because that smudged a bit. 600,000 trees without one tree guard. So it turned out there were no deer in 2010 at Heartwood Forest. We knew that because we carried out a herbivore impact assessment. Otherwise, we could quite easily have bought 600,000 tree guards without checking, which is why it's so important to do herbivore impact assessment first. We have created 850 acres of woodland there without a tree guard. It can be done. It's rare, I'll be honest. There are places in the UK where you will always find a browser, but there are places just like this with an example where you don't always do that. And you've probably saved yourself a humongous amount of money, best part of £1 million, by not using tree guards and stakes. Easterwoods in Scotland, this is actually not used with any protection at all because it's quite an urban site, and the worry was that it would get vandalised, the deer fence would be snipped through, and plastic tree guards would be thrown all over the floor. So bare whips have gone into the ground there, and they've been planted at 1 to 2 metre spacing to overplant. So if we do lose a few, then there's usually trees are planted somewhere between 2 and 3 metre spacing on average. But overplanting is another answer. Now, natural regeneration. You don't always have to plant trees. You can allow natural regeneration, and I won't go into the debate now about whether tree planting or natural regeneration is the best answer. Both seem to be a very good way of creating wildlife habitat. We do have a climate emergency on our hands. I have sites that have been untouched, unplanted, ungrazed for 20 years. There's no trees. If you go places like Knepp, where the famous rewilding is, and you've got willow seed there, you might get a woodland within 5 or 10 years, if not, 20, you're guaranteed. But there are areas where natural regeneration works, and where you don't need to plant trees, and you can just leave nature to move in itself, and that seed dispersal, either by wind or by animals, will do the job for you, and that will create fantastic woodland. So here's 4 sites I picked in the southwest where we've been doing it. So I actually left some buffer areas around much of our ancient woodland when I planted Avoncliff Wood, so that we had areas of natural regeneration, and about a third is completely naturally regenerating. But sometimes you do need to do some work on the ground, especially if it's got high nutrient input from previous grazing or previous agriculture. So scarifying the ground or creating bare earth can also work. Trenant in Cornwall, we've left vast areas there to naturally regenerate. Stratton Wood in Swindon, large areas of trees are coming forward there without any planting since 1995. And down the road from several of you who might be in Devon, from this Devon Wildlife Trust talk, Avon Valley in the south of Devon has huge areas of woodland planted on the left-hand side of that picture and unplanted on the right-hand side of that picture. So that one is the bottom right corner, Avon Valley, Devon, 2001, sorry. Left-hand side of that photo was planted, right-hand side is naturally regenerated. There's not a lot of difference, but at the time we wanted to do a bit of both. You'll see the trees are slightly higher on the left-hand side, but essentially all the structure is very similar because we planted trees that would have naturally come. Natural seeding. So we're going a bit more left field here. Natural seeding we've carried out at Wentwood. So we had a huge area of ancient woodland that we were restoring that suffered from larch Phytophthora rumorum, which is essentially a tree disease that infects larch, and that got a plant health notice from the government because it's a notifiable disease, and we had to clear fell the entire larch. Now larch, hybrid European or Japanese larch, technically is also a non-native species, so in some circumstances we'd remove it from an ancient woodland. And in this instance, when we removed the larch and we were looking at recreating broadleaf native woodland, we decided to naturally seed it. So we deer fenced most of it, but we left some areas undeer fenced, and then we cast a phenomenal amount of seed. So over 1 million birch seeds per hectare and 60,000 rowan seeds per hectare went into this site altogether across about 20 hectares. So that's a lot of seed, but we are in the very early stages of just seeing the success of how many rowan and how many birch are coming up, as well as other naturally dispersing trees which would have come from the surrounding ancient woodland. So that's deer fenced with natural seeding, and that ground was initially cleared from a plant health notice. So a bit of an unusual one, but well worth exploring natural seeding. You can buy tree seed en masse from several areas, and nurseries are actually collecting it up to plant whips. Even more left field, on a private estate in North Devon, I got to witness this very brilliantly unique way of also creating woodland in former agricultural fields, and that's heaping forest brash. So brash from thinning of conifer woodlands or brash from thinning of tree safety work has been heaped up in giant mounds and then In half of these mounds, whips have been planted, so there's a natural protection from deer amongst this, and in half of them they have been left to naturally regenerate. So we are going to monitor this and see, and fantastically the estate owners allowed me and one of my colleagues has been helping to advise them. But this is a really, really great example of thinking differently about woodland creation. Not only do you get woodland here, hopefully, but you also get mycorrhizal species that can move in. So what we do is all available to have a look at on the Woodland Trust website, but as I said, we don't have any answers yet. The tree guards and the sustainability credentials are still being researched by us, by University of Plymouth and by UCL in London to find out which is the most sustainable. So we do not have an answer into what is the best tree guard to use as an alternate, but we do have a list of what is available. And I strongly urge you to do what we're doing, which is to try something, is to trial something new, try something different, and take a gamble, because the whole sector should have been in this position 10 years ago, but unfortunately we're not. So we're having to deal with that legacy of plastic being the simple, very easy, lazy answer for many, many years, and we are trying to find something different at the moment. We're not the only organisation. There's some terrific organisations out there. Yorkshire Millennium Trust, Till Hill, Tree Council, to name a few, have their own trials, as well as a few other organisations that I can't think of at the top of my head. But quite a lot of organisations and the forest research trials are all going to be sharing results when we have them. At the moment, we are still in the trial phase and we don't have any results. We just have experiments and hopefully a willingness to share with you everything we are learning along the way. So that list of alternatives is the left-hand side, and that is the Forest Plastic Working Group list of alternative shelters. That's available via www.tinyurl, Earl as in url.com/forest plastics. So that list can be sent to you very easily, and you can sign up for updates from the Forest Plastic Working Group on future conferences, on future meetings and get-togethers, where we can share industry best practice in finding an alternative to plastic tree guards. So I hope that's answered and probably raised a few more questions amongst many of you. Thank you for listening to me. My name's Joe Middleton and I'm the site manager in the southwest of the Woodland Trust. If there's any questions, I'll hopefully do my best to answer, and if there's not, thanks for having me.
Huge thank you, Joe. It sounds like we need to make sure we have this talk every 5 years so you can keep updating us on the continuous trials that are happening. We've had a few questions come in, so I will just work my way through them if that's all right.
Yeah, would you like me to stop sharing?
Yeah, if you stop sharing, then everyone can see your face. There we go. Oh, I've lost my box. There we go. Would Woodland Trust consider creating a website for offering pre-owned guards for reuse? So, for example, linking groups that need it up with people that are trying to reuse them?
It's proved quite difficult even doing that across our own estate because of travel costs and hubs. Now, I do know that FWAG Southwest, so Farming Wildlife Advisory Group in the Southwest, had some terrific schemes over the last couple of years doing exactly that, but to recycle them. So for any landowner or any organisation who wanted to recycle plastic tree guards, you could drop them off at essentially a central hub. Now, I don't know if the Woodland Trust could do that en masse. We have a lot of people at head office, but actually in the regions, we are probably, people think we're bigger than we are. So I cover a couple of counties. I manage all our sites. Within the Southwest, there's probably only 20 members of staff covering the entire of the Southwest. So actually, we probably don't have the resources to run a hub and collate people in the right area. I'd say Facebook must have an easy way of doing that through organisations such as More Trees on Dartmoor, or Devon Wildlife Trust, or some of the Trees for Life organisations that have local social media areas where people can say, I have 2,000 tree guards no longer needed. They are reusable. But what we've also found, which is just a little word of warning, is not many tree guards are actually useful at the end of their life, because as that reason I was talking earlier on. They put in photodegradable substances to allow them to essentially biodegrade in situ down to microplastics. So lots of tree guards have fractured and split and are unusable, and we're only finding less than half of the tree guards we're going through at the end of their 5 to 7 years are usable. Now, if you're lucky enough to get many more than that, then I would strongly recommend you to reuse and then eventually recycle them. But to recycle them, you need to put them into ton bags and make sure that they are clean, and you have an intact, a packed tree guard slotted within themselves in a dense amount to be able to warrant even someone coming and collecting them on recycling. So that's a great idea, having a central area where you can definitely find recycled tree guards that are available to be reused. But I don't know if the Woodland Trust could provide that. If you email that suggestion to inquiries@woodlandtrust.org.uk, someone might give you a better answer than me.
Thanks, Joe. It's definitely something we've looked at as well. But again, the logistics of it overwhelmed us a bit, basically. It's a very good idea in principle, but once you start drilling down into making it work, it becomes a lot harder. But yeah, I think your local Facebook groups are always a good place to start with things like that to keep it local. Next question, what are vole guards?
So a tree guard can either be 1.8 if you've got red deer, 1.5 if you've got fallow deer, or generally the most common is 1.2. Now, you also get 60 centimeter tree guards, so we're talking height, to protect from rabbits, and a vole guard is usually about 30 centimeters, so 20 to 30 centimeters, small collars. What you can actually do is, if you've got a load of 1.2 tree guards that are being reused, you can cut them up and create about 10 from one particular guard to just protect, to stop voles essentially climbing in and eating. But voles are quite clever. They actually stick their noses under the tree guard, lift it up, bite off the bottom of the sapling, and then go on their merry way. So a vole guard is essentially a very small, somewhere between, I'd say, 20 and 50 centimeter shelter.
Great. Has Woodland Trust used pigs to create disturbance and help natural regeneration?
Yes, we've got a huge number of them in the New Forest and the Forest of Dean doing exactly that. So wild boar are, very closely pretty much related to pigs in the UK, because they escaped and have DNA of wild pigs in as much as they do of wild boar. So there are great areas of pigs doing exactly that. I went to a brilliant site with the Ambios and the Sharpham Trust in South Devon are rewilding with wild pigs, and they create a terrific amount of disturbance. So that is a great idea, but you also need that seed source, and it needs to be not nutrient rich ground, otherwise you'll just get thistles, docks, bramble, which are also good for wildlife. But if you want trees, and you want trees quickly, you probably want the pigs very close to a woodland to allow at least the non-windborne trees that pollinate, such as acorns and beech, to be able to land in those disturbed grounds. So we do use pigs, not as common as we probably could, because, as I said, there's only a few of us on the ground, and keeping control of pigs that are very good at escaping, in my experience, would be a full-time job for several stock people.
Great, thank you. So creating any type of shelter requires resources. Have you also looked at the carbon footprint and environmental consequences of each option, and which do you think is the least damaging? For example, I think you mentioned cotton, which is an intensive user of water for production, and some materials may have involved use pesticides, which harms insects and other wildlife.
Absolutely agree with you, which is why no tree guard is the best, most sustainable option of all. Now, of the 16 alternatives I've discovered over the last 3 years, we can't afford to go into the full sustainability life cycle analysis of every one of those products. You would expect those companies and those organizations to have done it themselves, but they haven't. So most of them have launched a product without carrying out their own studies into how long they last and how sustainable they are. But there are a couple of organizations probably coming to market sooner rather than previously, who will have already done their research and are doing terrific things. Now, I don't want to name any particular product and tell you which one is great and get people to invest their money, and I don't want to tell anyone to not buy another particular product, because we are still all in the trial stage. But yes, any product that we think is leading, we're going to pick the best 3, and we're going to carry out full life cycle analysis on that product from cradle to grave, which means looking at what that resin or plant or tree is, how it grew, where it grew, what it was grown with water, with pesticides, what the ground or the land that was misplaced to grow that product was, and how it was transported to get to a processing plant, and how it was manufactured and then shipped over to the UK, how it was sold, how it was packaged. But we're only going to do that on 3 products. So we are waiting to see which of the 3 leading products we will carry out that full life cycle analysis with. And hopefully we will part fund with them to take forward which we think is the leading product. We are a woodland charity, and our money is probably better placed elsewhere than doing the research for these organizations who are likely to make millions themselves out of the product. So we hope they do it themselves. But yes, we are looking exactly at where that cashew nut shell is grown, where it's from, where that wool is from, where that bioplastic and the starch and that maize has come from. But we should, and I think as many people here are likely to be consumers of these products, we should expect those companies to do the research themselves.
Great. Someone said we tried not protecting trees and they were massacred by deer. So for us, the no tree guard isn't an option. Deer fencing is very expensive. Been lucky to have some recycled plastic guards in the past. Is that the best option to go with right now? They're going to run out this year though. So what are other potential sources? Which I will say quickly, depending on where you are and how many you need, the Saving Devon's Treescape project does have spare plastic tubes and wooden stakes at the moment. So you can always get in touch with us and see if we can help you out. But Joe, have you got any other thoughts?
I'd say ask Rosie and Devon Wildlife Trust because they've got some available. But post on your local Facebook page, does anyone have any tree guards available? There are millions and millions in existence in the UK that are perfectly usable. But we do need a local way of being able to circulate this rather than transporting them in vast quantities across the UK in large lorries. So yes, reusing the existing ones is our priority too. That's why we've counted and worked out exactly where ours are. And when we do a new woodland creation project, we then look at our spreadsheet and go, okay, look, this site manager is going to have 50,000 available in 2026. How many of them are usable? And we'll collate that on our estate. But I think the best thing you can do is to try and reuse them locally. If you are getting them mullered by deer or eaten en masse and fencing isn't an option, then try an alternative of those products that are listed. You can have a look on any one of the photographs I showed earlier on the Zoom to find out which of the 3 classifications, whether it's cardboard, bioplastic or plant resin, you think will last the 2, 3, 5, 7 years it needs to. But everyone has their own sustainability questions. Some people are fine using crude oil. Some people do not want to use oil whatsoever. Some people are fine using plant starch. Some people aren't. So it's your own objectives that lead where your decision making goes. I can't tell you which one you should use because we believe certain things and you might believe something different. So I just advise you to have a look at the list and ask the supplier with a quick email, what's this made from, how sustainable is it, and will it last? Those are the 3 questions you just need to ask.
Great. We've got 5 minutes left and 4 questions, so we will just finish off these if that's all right with everyone. Do some bioplastics have the risk of affecting the soil if left to degrade? Could the organic matter from them cause some kind of leaching?
Good question. From the checks we have done with the organizations who are selling these products, there doesn't appear to be anything that will not be accessible. The problem is they're not biodegrading quick enough anyway. They look and feel remarkably like plastic. So several of these products aren't biodegrading. And as I said, they need to be industrially composted. So you're still having to collect them up, take them to a composting plant and put them into somewhere where over 40 degrees they will turn to mulch. Now, all of the products that are made from bioplastic claim they are biodegradability in soil. But as I said, there is no official UK standard for biodegradability in soil of tree guards. You buy a compost bag, depends on the council or whether that council can actually process the compost bag that you've put your compost in. If you go to any one big organization who are selling "I am not a plastic cup" and it looks remarkably like a plastic cup, that product, you can't just chuck it in your house, in your household recycling. That needs to be recycled with specialist equipment. So it really is an absolute rabbit hole of questions of whether your local authority provides the facilities to compost bioplastic. We don't think there's any problem with using bioplastic in the site as long as it's made sure it's collected and not turning into fragments. But I can't 100% tell you that those products available will not cause a problem in the future. I think the suppliers themselves should be answering those questions, and there's quite an easy list to be able to email some pretty big multinational companies as to whether that product is worm food or not.
We should do a panel event where we get all the suppliers and they all have to answer our questions.
They don't like answering too many questions. Some of them are brilliant. I must confess. Yeah.
Is there any research into using raw wool hung on the saplings to put deer off?
Yes. So the forest research trials that I mentioned that we're part funding, which is led by Forest Research, who's the government arm of the scientific side of the Forestry Commission, should we say. They are doing some brilliant studies using, as I said, sheep's wool. I mentioned earlier, sorry, I said sheep fat, but they are also using sheep's wool, exactly that, gluing it to the stem, the leading stem of the sapling, to see whether the wool stays on. The problem is they've planted several thousand trees on a hill in Scotland, several thousand trees in a flat lowland in England to compare the two. And I guarantee you, after a Scottish winter, the wool will not still be on that sapling 6 months later. But yes, it's definitely worth looking into. And sheep's fat, which is this product which is basically spraying it onto the leading stem once, if not twice a year, is also having some successful results in its early stages. You may have got the impression from this talk that I don't have a huge amount of answers, but we are asking the questions, and that's the thing we've discovered, is that we are hugely still in this trial phase. And I have learned a lot in the last 3 years. What I have definitely learned is we shouldn't be in this situation in 2023. We should have been in this situation in 2003 when people already knew plastic was a problem. So we are getting there, but the horse has bolted. People are selling products without any full credential checks yet. So sheep's wool, definitely a very good natural resource, but depends on where it is. If you've got an ability to keep gluing it and keep putting it back onto a sapling, then I'd say go for it, trial it, and let us know how you get on.
Thanks. I'll say we've been looking for plastic-free tree guards for the last 3 years of the project. Not sorry, tree guards, tree tags, so that we can let hedgerow trees grow up. And yeah, we've been working with the Tree Council, other councils, been speaking with people in Finland and Austria and all different companies, and there just isn't anything that exists that lasts the test of time at the moment. It is an absolute minefield of different things. Sorry, 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up for the evening. Is there any research on chili oil, which someone says has been recommended to put off deer?
I have no idea, but I'd love to know. I do know at Dartington Trust, they were trying, what's the really strong pepper that's used in Chinese cookery quite a lot, Szechuan. They were agroforestry growing Szechuan peppers. So agroforestry is where you plant trees as part of a crop, usually sometimes with a tree and then shrubs around it, and then something underneath, either grazing animals or arable crops. And I know they were planting Szechuan pepper around the bottom. I don't know if that was through natural protection or to harvest the Szechuan pepper, so I don't know. But chili sounds like a good idea. If deer and sheep don't mix, then I imagine deer and chili don't either. Again, you'd have to reapply it, thinking about things that go through a very long, wet, windy, stormy winter. You probably have to keep applying that chili quite a lot.
Yeah. Have Woodland Trust undertaken any overplanting schemes in areas with higher deer populations? Was establishment after, say, 5 years acceptable?
So overplanting, let me go back to my data on that one. So funnily enough, just near Bristol, I've just put in 5,000 trees at 1 meter spacing without any deer protection. I'm afraid they only went in November, so I've got absolutely no results. I went back, funnily enough, on Wednesday, and there is some browsing. But if we've planted at 1 meter spacing instead of 2 to 3, we've gone at least 2 or 3 times. By the time you increase the amount of trees, if you plant, let's say, 1 to 2,000 trees a hectare to 2 to 3 meter spacing, if you then double up, you're then looking at a huge amount of trees. So you're looking at 4,000 or 5,000 trees per hectare sometimes, and that's quite a lot of trees. So I do recommend trialing it, definitely, but without any protection at all, it's a gamble when you're going over a certain amount. I'd only trial that if I was planting, you know, a hectare. Anything more than that, then that's a gamble I wouldn't want to take. So of the one I think we planted, the example at Heartwood Forest was 600,000 trees, but there weren't any deer. So the only other two are this one in Scotland, but that was only 2,000 trees, and then this one near Bristol was 5,000 trees. Both of those have only just gone, well, one went in last year and another this year. I don't have any answers on that one, I'm afraid, but I'd be very interesting to know. There are certain species that deer don't browse as well, so I don't know whether you could plant a buffer of species that are unpalatable to deer around the outside.
Yeah, sorry, there's one more question that I think I missed, unless I'm going mad and I've already asked it. How long would you need to protect saplings from rabbits?
Get a centimetre ruler, measure a rabbit and its abilities to stand on its back legs, and then I'm guessing 60 centimetres a rabbit can't reach. The tree needs to just grow up beyond that 60 to 70 centimetres. Now, you might still get a few checking their teeth or, you know, fraying a smaller sapling. So I'd say a tree, it depends on the size of the tree you plant. If you plant a tree that's a 30 to 40 centimetre whip, might grow to 60 centimetres within 2 years and be completely clear of rabbits. If it's on very slow growing, poor soil, it might take 5 years to be clear of rabbits. So buy a bigger whip. Ask the nursery, instead of buying a 30 centimetre whip, can I buy a 60 centimetre whip? Might be clear in 1 year, maybe 2. So it really depends, and you can specify the size of the whip you want based on the nursery you buy from. So I'd say rabbits, you should be free once that tree gets to 60 to 70 centimetres and has the ability to stand on its own without blowing over.
Perfect, thank you. That is the end of the questions. There's also lots of comments saying thank you and fantastic presentation. So we've only gone 5 minutes over, so we will wrap up there. So a huge thank you to Joe for taking the time to come and share the learnings that Woodland Trust are doing at the moment. We'll try and get him back in a few years and he can update us on how all the trials are going. But yeah, we're all on this journey, so as long as we work together, and you're all here making a positive change already listening, so thank you very much. I'll send around a follow-up email at the start of next week with a link to the recording of the talk, and also any of the links that Joe mentioned today during his talk, so that you have access to all of those resources. We have lots of other events coming up, including tree planting events in Devon, so I'll let you know what else the Saving Devon's Treescape project is up to as well, so you can get involved and help us improve Devon's treescapes. But for now, I'll let you get on with your evenings, and thank you very much.